Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we're taking a really close look at a specific spiritual text. It's a discourse that focuses on, well, what it calls the domain of insight, Vipassana.
That's right. And it's a fascinating source, gives a really distinct perspective on some core ideas.
Exactly. So, our mission today is to unpack its message. We want to explore how it describes reality, the classic ideas of impermanence, suffering, and non-self.
Anicca, Dukkha, Anatta.
Right. And crucially, how this source presents a specific path it claims leads to liberation, to freedom.
It does use some quite specific language, things like different bodies or a particular kind of eye for seeing.
Yeah, and we want to make that clear. We'll focus on the meaning behind those terms.
Yeah.
For an English-speaking audience, definitely want to avoid getting bogged down in long technical bits from the original.
Absolutely. Think of it like finding the path through the woods, getting straight to the core insights without getting tangled in the undergrowth of unfamiliar terms.
Perfect. So it's about looking deeply at existence. And according to this source, the potential for freeing ourselves from suffering.
Precisely. Guiding you through what this particular text says is important for understanding reality and achieving freedom.
Okay, let's jump right in then. Where does this source kick off its explanation of insight?
Well, it starts with those fundamentals we mentioned, what many traditions see as the three characteristics of existence. The source uses phrases that mean seeing all compounded things as impermanent, all compounded things as suffering, and all phenomena as non-self.
Ah, yes, Anicca, Dukkha, Anatta, the big three. How does the source frame why seeing these is so important?
It really stresses that this isn't just, intellectual understanding. It's about seeing these truths deeply, with wisdom. Paññaya is the term used.
With wisdom. Okay.
So first, there's seeing all compounded things, basically anything that arises due to causes and conditions as impermanent as Anicca.
Everything that's put together falls apart, essentially.
Pretty much. The source gives examples like, well, our own bodies change constantly, objects decay, even huge things like mountains erode over time. Nothing is static.
So really internalizing that everything is transient, big or small.
Exactly. And flowing from that is seeing all compounded things as suffering, as dukkha.
Now, suffering can mean different things. How does the source define it here? Is it just physical pain?
No, not just physical pain, though that's included. It's more about the inherent unsatisfactoriness that comes because things are impermanent. Because they change, because they end, they can't offer lasting, true happiness.
Ah, okay. That subtle tension underneath even pleasant experiences because you know they won't last.
Precisely. The source points specifically to the 5 aggregates. That's our physical form, feelings, perceptions, mental formations, consciousness, the components of our experience. It says these are inherently dukkha.
All parts of what we think of as us.
Yes, and it says this applies across the board in all the different realms or states of existence it discusses later. If it's compounded, it has this characteristic of dukkha.
Got it. Impermanence leads to unsatisfactoriness. What's the third insight?
The third is seeing all phenomena as non-self, anatta.
Non-self. That's often the trickiest one. How does this text approach it?
It makes an interesting distinction. It argues that the phenomena themselves, like a physical sensation, a thought, consciousness, even the physical body, these things aren't a real, permanent, independent self.
So they're things the self experiences, but not the self itself.
Kind of. They're what the sense of self might rely on or interact with, but they lack that core, unchanging essence we tend to assume is there. The text uses its concept of different bodies or states of being here.
The 8 bodies you mentioned earlier.
Yes, things like the regular human body, subtle bodies, celestial states, even very high Brahma realms. It lists these 8 conventional states, and it says ultimately all of them are non-self. They're phenomena, they arise and pass, they aren't a permanent I.
Okay, so if you truly see these 3 things, impermanence, suffering, non-self, and everything, with this deep wisdom, what happens then, according to the source?
The text says when you see this clearly, with paññaya, you become weary or dispassionate towards suffering. Nibbindati dukkha is the phrase.
Weary. Does that mean depressed or giving up?
No, not in a negative way. It's more like a profound disillusionment. Seeing the futility of chasing after things that are inherently unstable and can't deliver lasting peace. It's like, this is how it is.
A wise letting go, a turning away from the chase.
Exactly. A dispassion born of understanding. And the source concludes right there, this seeing, this resulting weariness or dispassion, that is the path to purity. Essa maggo visuddhya.
Wow. So that deep realization is the path itself, the way to purification.
That's how this text frames it. It's the essential first step, the foundation.
That really sets the stage, but then the source seems to pivot a bit, suggesting that, well, even though this path exists, not many people actually manage to walk it.
Yes, it paints quite a stark picture next. It uses imagery like, few are those among humans who go to the farther shore. Apakate manusisu ye jana paragamino.
The far shore. What does that represent here?
Nibbana. Liberation from the whole cycle of suffering and rebirth that this text, like much of Buddhism, describes.
And what about everyone else, the majority?
It says, this other folk runs up and down right on this shore. Ataya iparapajapiramanudapati. They stick to the near bank.
Stuck on this side of the river, so to speak. What keeps them there, according to this source?
It suggests they're stuck identifying with or maybe clinging to those 8 conventional bodies or realms we mentioned.
The human, subtle, celestial states, etc.
Right, or they're caught up in worldly things, attachments, fixed ideas, especially that persistent view of having a permanent self residing within all this change, sakeyadihi. That keeps them running along the near bank, unable to cross.
It really emphasizes the challenge, doesn't it? The difficulty of breaking free. So if only a few make it across, how does the source say crossing is possible?
Okay, this is where the text introduces its really distinctive element. It states that crossing over requires seeing with a specific kind of vision what it calls the Dhammakaya eye. Tad Dhammakaya.
The Dhammakaya eye. That sounds quite specific to this source.
It really is central to its explanation. The text draws a very sharp contrast. It distinguishes between seeing with the ordinary eyes that belong to those 8 mundane bodies or states.
The conventional ways of seeing.
Yes, the kind of perception associated with achieving states of concentration, or samatha, as this text frames it. It contrasts that with seeing via the Dhammakaya eye. And it says that Vipassana, true insight specifically, is the seeing that happens through this Dhammakaya eye.
So it's not just a metaphor. This source presents it as the actual mechanism for insight.
That's certainly how it reads. It's positioned as the essential tool, the perspective needed to cut through the illusions of permanence and self, the thing that enables you to cross from the near shore to the far shore.
Okay, so this Dhammakaya eye is the key to insight, the key to crossing over. What does the path look like once you have this capacity? The source mentions abandoning darkness, cultivating light.
Exactly. That's the practical instruction that follows. Kanpa, tamavipahaya sukhetatito. Abandon dark states. Cultivate bright states.
Anarchan bright states.
Yeah.
Dhamma here, meaning qualities or phenomena.
Yes. Dark Dhamma refers to all the unwholesome stuff: greed, hatred, delusion, unskillful actions, wrong views, things that defile the mind. White Dhamma or bright Dhamma are the opposite: purity, wisdom, kindness, compassion, mindfulness, concentration, the wholesome qualities.
So it's a path of active purification.
Absolutely. The source links this directly to purifying oneself from mental defilement, citiglosahi. And interestingly, it connects this purification process to attaining progressively purer, more refined Dhammakaya bodies or states.
So the Dhammakaya isn't just an eye, but also a state or body that gets purified.
That seems to be the implication here. These attained Dhammakaya states are described as clean, bright, free from darkness. So purifying the mind and developing this Dhammakaya seem to be two sides of the same coin in this text view.
And the ultimate goal, the destination of this path, is Nibbana. What's the source's description of Nibbana?
It's described as a state, or maybe even a place, of profound peace, quietness, stillness, viveke, far removed from clinging and grasping oka anokamagama.
Away from the usual home of attachment.
Right, a place where one finds deep satisfaction tatravarhera precisely because one has abandoned desires hitva kam.
And does it connect reaching Nibbana back to the Dhammakaya?
Yes, it reinforces that point. It implies that successfully crossing the river, reaching Nibbana, depends on having attained this Dhammakaya. Without it, you're still stuck on the near shore, unable to fully access or realize that state of liberation.
So the Dhammakaya is crucial for the insight and for achieving the final goal.
That's the clear link this source makes. Now, maybe we should get into what exactly is seen with this Dhammakaya eye during Vipassana practice, according to this text.
Good idea. You mentioned it distinguishes Vipassana from samatha, or concentration practice.
Yes. It associates samatha with the 8 conventional bodies and realms staying within the mundane, perhaps achieving high states of concentration, but not necessarily liberating insight. Vipassana, the domain of insight, is specifically about seeing the true nature of reality using the Dhammakaya eye.
Okay, so what are the key things, the domains that this eye perceives?
The source lists several. It's about seeing their Anicca, Dukkha, Anatta nature, impermanent suffering, non-self through this specific lens.
Right. What's first?
First, the five aggregates, again, form, feeling, perception, mental formations, consciousness. Vipassana here means seeing these aggregates as they manifest in all 8 of those mundane bodies, as inherently impermanent, unsatisfactory, and lacking a real self.
So analyzing the components of experience across all possible states of being.
Yes, and realizing their fundamental nature isn't solid or lasting, no matter how refined the state. It's applying that initial insight systematically, but from the specific Dhammakaya perspective.
Okay, what's next?
Next, the 12 sense bases ayatana. This means looking at the 6 internal senses, eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, mind, and the 6 external objects, forms, sounds, smells, tastes, touches, mental objects.
The whole apparatus of perception.
Exactly. Vipassana here is seeing both the sense organ and its object as Anicca, Dukkha, Anatta. Understanding that our entire interaction with the world happens through these impermanent, unsatisfactory, non-self channels.
Taking apart the very process of how we experience anything.
Precisely. Then it goes even deeper with the 18 elements, or dhatu.
18. How did that work?
This breaks down the sense experience further. For each sense, you have the sense organ, like the eye element, the object, like the form element, and the consciousness that arises from their meeting, like the visual consciousness element. 6 senses times 3 components gives you 18 elements.
Ah, okay. Organ, object, consciousness for each sense.
Right. And Vipassana here, seen through the Dhammakaya eye, is analyzing all 18 of these elements. Eye element, form element, visual consciousness element, ear element, sound element, auditory consciousness element, and so on, and seeing each one as impermanent, suffering, and non-self.
So it's not just the eye that's impermanent, but the seeing itself, the consciousness, is also just a fleeting element.
That's the analysis presented here. It's a very granular look at experience. The source also lists the 22 faculties, or indriya.
22 faculties, what are those?
These refer to various controlling principles or dominant forces in our experience, things like the faculty of sight, hearing, etc., but also life faculty, faculties related to feeling, pleasure, pain, neutrality, and mental faculties like faith, energy, mindfulness, concentration, and wisdom, even faculties related to stages of the path.
So the powers are functions that shape our experience.
Exactly. And again, the practice is seeing these controlling forces themselves as impermanent, bound up with suffering, and not constituting a self. Then crucially, the source includes the 4 noble truths, ariyasacca.
The absolute core of Buddhist teaching.
Indeed. The truth of suffering, dukkha, its cause, samudaya, its cessation, nirodha, which is Nibbana, and the path, magga, leading to cessation. The source gives classic examples: birth, aging, sickness, death, or suffering. The cause is craving taught for pleasure, existence, non-existence. Cessation is Nibbana. The path involves morality, concentration, wisdom.
And a connection to the Dhammakaya eye.
The text explicitly states that truly, clearly comprehending these 4 noble truths in their depth requires seeing them with the Dhammakaya eye.
Wow. So even understanding the most fundamental truths depends on this specific mode of seeing, according to this text.
That's the strong claim it makes. And finally, it includes dependent origination, paticcasamuppada.
The 12 links explaining how suffering arises from ignorance.
Yes, that chain of causation. Ignorance leads to formations, leads to consciousness, and so on, eventually leading to suffering. The source says seeing this whole process clearly, understanding how the cycle perpetuates itself, also requires the Dhammakaya eye.
It really feels like this source is building a comprehensive case. It's arguing that the ability to genuinely penetrate reality, to see Anicca, Dukkha, Anatta across all these layers, aggregates, sense bases, elements, faculties, noble truths, dependent origination, is entirely contingent on having and using this Dhammakaya eye.
That seems to be the core argument, that seeing is Vipassana in this specific framework.
And this whole path, this deep seeing, leads to...
Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
What's the final outcome described?
The source concludes with a really evocative description of the fully realized person, the arahant. It uses the phrase often translated as, their taints destroyed, luminous, they are utterly unbound in the world. Ksasava jutimanto te loke parinibutati.
Let's unpack that a little based on the terms. Taints destroyed.
Kasava. That means having completely eradicated the asavas, the deep-rooted defilements or outflows like sensual desire, the desire for existence, wrong views, ignorance, the things that fuel the cycle of suffering.
The total inner cleansing.
Exactly. Then luminous jutimanto. This suggests that inner radiance, the brightness of profound wisdom and purity, the opposite of the dark Dhamma that was abandoned.
Shining with wisdom.
Yes, and utterly unbound or fully extinguished in the world, parinibbuta. This signifies the attainment of complete Nibbana within this lifetime, freedom from any future rebirth, the final end of suffering.
So according to this source, that's the culmination. Seeing reality deeply via the Dhammakaya eye, undertaking the purification, abandoning dark, cultivating light, leads finally to this state of the arahant. Defilements gone, radiant, completely liberated.
That's the journey it outlines, from the basic insights about reality to understanding why liberation is rare, identifying the specific method, the Dhammakaya eye, for Vipassana, and then applying that insight across these domains, leading ultimately to that state of radiant freedom.
Okay, we've really taken a deep dive into this source's quite specific map of the path to purification. We've touched on the core insights, Anicca, Dukkha, Anatta, its view on the rarity of liberation, the unique role it gives the Dhammakaya eye for true Vipassana across various domains, and its picture of the final goal, arahantship.
And I think what really stands out, as you said, is this consistent thread connecting profound insight and liberation directly to this specific faculty or state, the Dhammakaya. It's presented as more than just understanding or concentration. It's about seeing from a fundamentally different, awakened perspective.
Which leads to a really interesting question for you, the listener, to maybe reflect on. Given this source's unique emphasis that true insight and freedom might depend on developing a specific inner capacity, like this Dhammakaya.
What does that imply?
Yeah, what does that imply for how we think about different spiritual paths? Or even about the nature of consciousness itself? Does this perspective challenge your own understanding of how deep truth is accessed? Or maybe does it resonate with something you've considered?
It's definitely a distinct viewpoint worth mulling over.
Indeed. Well, thank you for joining us on this exploration into a unique perspective on the path to purification. We hope it's given you some fresh insights for your own journey.